Hi and welcome to episode 21 of Beating BDD, a podcast about body dysmorphic disorder from the BDD Foundation in the UK. I'm Claire Atherton, and for this episode I spoke to Flora Howarth, who suffered with BDD alongside an eating disorder until just 18 months ago. Since then, she's made truly inspirational progress in overcoming the disorder and built up a personal toolkit of tricks that I'm sure will be really helpful to listeners. Over to Flora. Hi Flora, it's lovely to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're welcome, you're very welcome. What's motivated you to come and talk about your experiences of BDD today?
Yeah, so I really struggled to understand, accept and sort of articulate what was happening to me, in that I'd realised that I have had for a while BDD. And I think the more that we can sort of share and understand, it's a lot easier to deal with, and the more compassionate we can be to both ourselves and to others. And I never ever thought I'd sort of get to a place where I'd be on a Beating BDD podcast. Yet here I am doing this. And I just want people to know that you can do it too. And I know that's like super cheesy, super cliche. And you don't actually believe it when people say it. But for me, I just couldn't sort of bear life like that anymore. And I didn't want to sort of end my life, but I didn't want to live like that anymore. And it was almost like sort of self-harming. And I was, sort of done with that. So I guess I'm coming on here just to sort of say, there's a life out there to be lived and enjoyed and fulfilled. And we all deserve that.
That's a lovely positive message. How would you describe where you are with your recovery at the moment then?
Yeah, so I'm probably just over a year into recovery. And I think recovery means something different for everyone. And for me, it doesn't necessarily have like a start and an end date. It's more of an ongoing journey. And I'd say that I'm sort of living with less BDD, or at least not letting it overcome me as much. I have like a little motto that helps me. And it's, I may not ever overcome BDD, but I won't let it overcome me. So that's sort of where I am at the moment.
And you said when we chatted before that you were relearning how to be yourself without the safety behaviours of BDD. Can you explain a bit more what that means? I mean, what does the BDD free or BDD light Flora look like?
Yeah, so it would be a place where, as I say, sort of BDD doesn't overcome me as much as before, and it's a much more sort of enjoyable place to be, and it's less anxious. It's not worrying about things as much, and it's enjoying sort of every moment regardless of how I look. One of the main things, because my BDD is all about my size, shape and weight of my body, so it's not spending months and months in the run up to sort of an exciting event sort of doing all of these awful things that I realise are so bad for me. It's not isolating from friends and family to avoid, being seen. It's the spontaneous enjoyment and the rich, fulfilling life that's out there. And I guess it's kind of like doing the things that really brings me happiness and joy without having to worry about what I look like. And I suppose living in colour is probably the best way to describe that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I understand that you've suffered from both an eating disorder and BDD. Did they kind of arrive at the same time, or what can you tell me about how and when they both appeared?
It's really difficult for me to sort of pinpoint which one came first, as it were, and it sort of feels like a very vicious circle where one almost like cheers the other one on in a really, really sordid way, and hold hands cheerleading for the wrong reasons. And it was only really a year ago, just over a year ago actually, when the first UK lockdown hit in March 2020. That's when I realised that the thing I've been sort of totally and utterly consumed by for 20 odd years since being a teenager was BDD. And I've always had a shocking relationship with my body and food, but it wasn't actually until a little bit later after that, until sort of summer last year, that I realised I'd also been living with eating disorders. So it's really difficult to know sort of which one happened first. I feel like they're very intertwined in each other.
And what do you think the triggers were? Is it possible to isolate what you think may have caused you to have these feelings about this relationship with your body and these feelings about your appearance?
Yeah, through doing quite a lot of work and therapy and things like that, I think the main thing that has contributed towards them is, and the development of them is this thing called diet culture and the sort of beauty standards and the societal norms and views of what somebody should look like, and then sort of how I was treated growing up because of the way I looked. So diet culture is all about the idea and the message that like health and beauty equals sort of thinness, and it's got one certain look. And anything apart from that is like inferior and less worthy and ugly. So I was always told and given the message that my body isn't right or acceptable unless it looked a certain way, and was a certain size and weighed a certain amount. So yeah, the whole sort of, BMI thing is still very much a huge trigger. But yeah, in 2014, I also sort of had surgery on my spine, because I had a bulging disc. And actually from that, I was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease. So not only do I have BDD, I've got DDD as well, all the acronyms. But yeah, that sort of affects my ability to move pain-free and exercise and do the things that I used to be able to do. And since then, I've never really been able to maintain the body that I had and felt I should look like. And sort of that body gave me the happiness and the acceptance and the normality and the beauty that I was always told a sort of certain look of a body would have. So I kind of since then really did feel that whole thing of my body is a mishmash of different parts that don't belong together. And this is not what I'm meant to look like. This isn't my body. And so alongside that, I also have the physical sensation of not feeling a connection between my upper and lower body because of the discs that can sometimes sort of bulge out and press on the nerves. So you don't always feel the connection between your bits. And so that kind of makes my BDD a lot more loud and overbearing in that, this body is just useless kind of thing. So I think there's quite a few different, triggers, and it's really hard to know what's going to come next. But I am learning to sort of deal with those a lot better. And actually the behaviours and the things that I do after I'm triggered as well are easier to deal with too. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about those actually. So when you were feeling this, at your worst with this relationship with your body and feeling like things just weren't the way they should be, how did that manifest itself? What behaviours were you doing, and what feelings were you having specifically?
Yeah, so the sort of safety behaviours that I now know them as, I was sort of developing but didn't even realise I was developing them because it was, as it sort of says, it's keeping you safe from harm, a behaviour that keeps you safe. And the main thing was all about sort of using food and exercise to control my body shape and size and weight, which is why I feel, the eating disorder is sort of just part and parcel of this as well. But then it's kind of like I would sort of wear just black clothes, because growing up I was told that black is slimming. I would wear very high-waisted clothes that pull me in, so it covered up my body and morphed it into a different shape to look differently. And that would cause, huge amounts of pain. As well as sort of like pulling my body around to see, what my body would look like in a different shape and size. Thinking about surgery and things like that. The mirror checking is a huge one as well, because it's also in any reflective surfaces. It's not just mirrors. So, a lot of kitchen things and meeting rooms at work as well, if they were sort of glass and see-through. And one of the ones that I really did notice was not letting much natural daylight in through the windows at home, especially in the bathroom, because that's where you're sort of the most exposed to your body. And then just ones like, ones that intrude into your life in terms of not accepting social events if they clashed with certain exercises that I wanted to go to, cancelling plans if I didn't feel like my body looked acceptable. in photos and videos, holding my posture in a certain way to look a certain way so my body would look differently. Using filters. There's so many safety behaviors, picking different places to sit when out in public, and actually researching places as well. So when going to restaurants or people's houses, like thinking about what positions I'd be sitting in or standing in and basing my outfits on that kind of thing. So everything was just about, does my body look acceptable to go outside?
It's an all-consuming thing then, isn't it?
Yeah.
How did you then realise that the problem was psychological and not physical?
Yeah, so I suppose because when I was looking into sort of getting help and everything, the BDD Foundation did sort of they're called support structured groups. I think that's what they're referred to as. And they're basically kind of group therapy support sessions. And during those, we learnt about theory A and theory B. Theory A is that the issue is my body. It's a physical issue. And theory B is the issue that it's the way I think about my body. So it's a psychological issue. And through doing exposures and starting to live in theory B, even though I'm not quite still there with believing it, this did sort of help me realize that it's not me that's the problem physically, it's the way I think about my body that's the problem. And so when I sort of look back into sort of being in the grips of BDD and eating disorder behavior, despite losing weight and changing my body in different ways and sort of wearing the clothes that would make me feel acceptable, it was never enough. And I still wasn't, right. And I always thought I was never good enough. And so that sort of showed me that it was never my body. It was always how I see my body and how I view my body. But there was a really, really freeing realization that I had, a moment of joy when I kind of realized, how much BDD has taken from my life, really. And it was when I was getting a new mirror. So I've always had this full length mirror, and I just wanted to get rid of it because I wanted to sort of look into improving how I see myself in the mirror. And when I got this mirror, I sort of put it in different positions in my room, I suppose to get the perfect lighting. And one morning when I was doing a body check, just to see how, ugly I looked that day, I was moving away from the mirror and I saw this incredible sunrise. And I absolutely love sunrises and sunsets. And it was reflecting into the mirror from this tiniest gap in the blinds that was shut, obviously, because that's one of my sort of safety behaviors. And I had this really amazing moment of realization of, oh my God, I'm missing so many beautiful things I love because of my BDD and because of the ruminating and the preoccupations. And it really helped me to sort of realize that there is this other life, out there to be enjoyed. And I really wanted that. And that's what sort of spurred me on to sort of live more in the theory B and give that a bit more of a go, because there's all of these things that I'm missing out on that are just so beautiful. And I know it sounds really cheesy, but it's just that one thing that you absolutely love. And you get that sort of glimpse of a really sort of enlightening moment, really, that it isn't, it doesn't have to be that way. Yeah.
No. And you said then that you discovered that you had BDD last kind of around March last year. So what made you then realise that was actually what you had? And then later on that you realised that there were also eating disorders at play?
Yeah. So I've always maybe thought potentially I could have sort of BDD, but it's one of those things where I never felt ill enough to really have it. I just, the culture and society that we live in, there's so many sort of beauty standards and things. You just kind of, I thought, oh, I'm just being a bit sort of self-conscious and everybody has body hang-ups. But it was when I was doing, I was taping a video of myself doing an exercise class at home because of the lockdown and wanting to sort of get enthusiastic about home workouts and put myself out there online, getting into the spirit of lockdown. I rewatched this video and that's when it hit me. And I was like, oh my good God, like, this is what you actually look like. This is disgusting. You're huge. You're this, you're that, you're everything that you could name under the sun. And that's when I was like, okay, this is something else. This doesn't feel just like this, that, and the other, because then all of the sort of what I now know as safety behaviours were kicking in, and I wouldn't meet friends online. So I was, not being on camera or at work, and everything just started to sort of add up. And then as I was looking into it, because I'd sort of thought about it in the past, but thought, no, that can't be something that affects me. It became very apparent that this was what I had, and that I really, really needed some help for it, because it got to a point where over the last year, I just haven't wanted to go out. I just didn't want to be seen until I looked acceptable. And it's basically the sort of story of my life unfolding before my eyes, in a very isolated place, because I suppose, the busyness of life doesn't allow you to think about it really, or to deal with it. So it very much hit home that this is what I've been sort of living with and dealing with for 20 odd years. And then, as I said earlier, the whole sort of eating disorder thing came into play as well. And, I think it was very, very obvious that I'd been sort of living with this for a very long time.
Yeah. How long do you think, actually? When did you first start to feel this way about your body? What kind of age were you?
Yeah, it's definitely 20 plus years, because whilst I was sort of looking through some stuff, I found some old diaries of when I was about 13, 14, and thought, let's have a look at what the 13, 14-year-old me was sort of writing down and journaling. And there was so much in there about, being bullied, like physically and mentally, for my size and shape and weight, and the things that my friends and family were saying, and diet culture things, and in fact, TV programs as well, and things, that you see in magazines. And yeah, so it's very much been something that when I look back that far, it was definitely present, but it was something that just was treated as like, sort of normality, in terms of, oh, well, everybody should be, losing weight and not looking like that, and not being fat. And fat was almost, bad and ugly and unhealthy and ill. And, that sort of messaging that I was sort of given from a very, very young age has just sat with me for 20 years and has had that impact on my life.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's hard for people who don't have BDD to sometimes resist the pull of those messages as well, isn't it? Because they're very pervasive.
Yeah, and I think that the society in which I'm sort of 35 now, and so when I was younger and sort of people my age, we're surrounded by, that beauty ideal. But I think it's when I look back and how much I've lost in life because of, internalizing all of that and being bullied, and actually believing that there's something wrong with me and that my body isn't right, and waking up every single day hating myself and feeling like I don't have the right body and it's not correct. I think that's where it sort of, creeps into the BDD, because it just consumes you, and it's all the preoccupation and how it affects your life then.
So am I right in thinking that you didn't actually get a sort of formal diagnosis? Is that right? You didn't go to the doctor and get a diagnosis, or?
Yeah, no, that's correct. I basically sort of read up about it, and like I said, have for a while maybe thought that I might have had BDD, and it was basically confirmation that I do. And I've not had some very good experiences of going to the doctor throughout my life, but what I did do was, because obviously we were in a situation where it was lockdown, and we were in a pandemic. It was sort of April, May time, 2020. I actually went on my local NHS wellbeing service website, and I self-referred myself for some treatment. And I was actually offered online CBT through the NHS, because obviously nobody really knew what the situation was with what was going on with the pandemic. And the doctors were very much, in the middle of a pandemic and very concerned about the coronavirus. So I just sort of took matters into my own hands, and like I said earlier, it was very much like I just couldn't live like that anymore, and I just had to do something. And then I came across the BDD Foundation, which is just an incredible organisation. And honestly, without the support group therapy, I don't think I would have been sort of in this position at this time. It's been so helpful. And just a necessary resource when there isn't that much out there. So yeah, I very much sort of did what I needed to do to get the help and support. And I'm still sort of waiting for some as well. And I'm thinking about going for some private therapy as well for BDD, because I'm a believer in it shouldn't ever really get to a crisis point again for me, to sort of, get help. It's a constant thing that I'm going to have to sort of live with and manage and deal with.
So you mentioned the group program that you took part in and the BTD Foundation ran. What particularly helped you, do you think, on that program? Can you remember which of the activities? You've mentioned their exposures, but was there anything else that you felt particularly useful?
Yeah. So the way that they're set up as sort of group therapy, and it's like a mixture of like the evidence-based therapeutic approaches mixed with the lived expertise and experience of the group facilitators. And it's like a module-based approach, and it covers loads of different topics. And it's like a therapy approach as well. So the ones that I found really, really useful were the modules that were about understanding BDD and your past experiences that may have contributed to developing BDD. There was also one on valued directions of how you want to live your life. And that one really helped me sort of focus on, there is this life out there. How do I want to live my life, with less BDD and enjoy myself? There's one on like refocusing attention, and that one is excellent as well, because it's all about, you as a person. And I cannot advocate enough the one about looking beyond our appearance, because that's one of the main things that's really, really helped me is, sort of looking at my worth in terms of me as a person rather than what I look like, because for the whole of my life, all I've ever done is base my worth in, my appearance. And yeah, there's other ones, and the self-compassion one, again, I can't praise that one enough as well, because that one was just brilliant. Because I sort of, when I first did that module, it just did not resonate with me. I was thinking, well, what on earth is there to be compassionate about within myself? Like, there's nothing good about me whatsoever. And then I bought a book on it, and I was, reading more and more into it. And it just kind of clicked one day. And I was like, actually, I'm really, really, a nice person. I'm kind, I'm caring. There's all these different, components of me away from my appearance. And I deserve to live a life, that's fulfilling. And that was where the self-compassion sort of came in. And one that really stands out is like the coping mechanisms and grounding techniques and ways to sort of deal with things and the exposures. So it's fantastic, because it's coming from people who have been there, and they're sort of on their journey, or they've recovered, and it's like coming from someone who knows exactly what's going on with you, and they totally understand. And then I suppose the other side of it is the other people in the group, in that, not a lot of people I know have BDD. And it's just, there's something really reassuring about someone who gets it. And, when somebody says something, it's like, oh my God, are you actually in my head? Like, this is exactly how I feel and I think, and this is exactly what I'm going through. And like I say, there's something really reassuring about, that sort of shared experience and someone to lean on and who gets it.
No, it makes so much sense. Really important, isn't it, having that support? Do you have any tips and tricks of your own, things that you've learned along the way that you'd like to tell listeners about in case they're useful for them as well?
Yes, I have quite a few actually. So I hope you don't mind if I sort of share quite a few, because
go for it, yeah.
This was, one of the things that like really, really helped me because I think I said at the beginning, I was so lost with it all. I didn't know, I didn't understand what was going on. I couldn't like understand how to deal with it. And it was through people sharing how they've got through it and what they've been doing that really helped me. And one of the main things, which is sort of linked to self-compassion, is self-care, and whatever that might look like, because I know the sort of most popular sort of Instagrammable self-cares are sort of pampering and baths and all of this stuff. But whatever self-care looks like, it might be sort of getting an early night if you feel you need to rest. It might be taking time out for yourself to do what makes you happy and what makes you feel good and what makes you feel like you. Buying something new or treating yourself to something, and just being kind to yourself as well. I think self-care makes me feel like I'm worthy. And it's had such an impact on the way that I think about myself and the kindness and compassion that I've developed towards myself. So big tick for self-care for me anyway. And one that I think is really quite difficult, but really, really helps me anyway, once I sort of mastered it, is finding my inner cheerleader to make that inner bully, the BDD, a lot quieter. And it's harnessing sort of that cheerleader in physical things, if that's at all possible. And for me, that was positive affirmations, which at the start were really, really difficult. I just didn't resonate with them. When I was looking into them, it was things like, I'm amazing, I've got this, I am loved. And they just didn't really sit with me, and they didn't really mean anything to me. So what I did was, when I bought my new full length mirror that I was talking about earlier, I actually bought some love heart shaped Post-it notes. Because I really like the love heart shape, and they're pink, and I quite like pink as well. And I basically did a different Post-it note to say different things that are relevant to me and my life and my persona that I could actually connect with, and that meant something that was helpful for me as a positive affirmation. So things like, accept your body and appreciate what it does, because I've had so many years of not accepting my body for how it is and not appreciating what it does. Another one is, my body doesn't define me, because it doesn't. There are so many other things, and my appearance is the least interesting thing about me. And things like no filters needed, because I just, for so many years when filters were invented, just could not have a photo taken of myself without a filter. And then other ones are sort of like, be unapologetically yourself, because I've, apologized for myself for so many years. And the last one is like, stop letting the mirror lower your confidence and define your worth, because that's what I've done again for so many years. And it's finding that inner cheerleader and bringing it out and making it relevant to what you want to do with your life and what you want to be as a person. So yeah. And the other one that I had, which is really, really important, I think, is I had one that said, I am perfect as I am. And then we did a module in the BDD support groups that was about perfectionism. And I realized that I was still holding myself to a certain standard, of, perfect, and that actually perfection doesn't exist, as much as we're led to believe that there is this perfect, body or perfect image of ourselves. So what I did was I crossed out perfect, and I was sat there thinking, what can I put instead? And it just felt right to leave it blank. So it now reads, I am as I am, and that's me being me, and that's absolutely okay and acceptable. The other things are sort of like, the positive attributes diary that I do as well. So instead of like thinking, I've got great eyes, or I've got great this, that, and the other to my body, I do a diary about the sort of positive attributes that I've demonstrated in the day. So today I sort of congratulated some colleagues for some of the work they've done, and I thought it was really, really great, and it lifted my mood. And I sort of thought to myself, that's a really kind thing of me to do, because, that's going to build up their sort of, feelings, and it might make them feel better, but also it's like me giving them something. So, and I think gratitude as well is something that I think really, really helps, being grateful for things that your body can do rather than focusing on the things that you might think your body can't do or that you're not particularly happy with. And I know people use the word perceived flaws, but I tend not to use that because I try not to think of my body as flaws. But yeah, and I think the last thing I'd want to share is that try and do things intuitively. The one thing I've started to do is dress intuitively because all my life all I've ever done is wear black. So now I sort of dress in clothes that I like and that feel good and don't necessarily like make me look good, if that makes sense. And it's more of I'm putting on today what I feel I want to wear, what represents me, rather than, oh, this will make me look a certain way. So yeah, I guess that's everything.
That's fabulous. You've really built up a proper little toolkit for yourself, haven't you, on top of everything you learned on this? You've obviously done a lot of work as well, which is fantastic. So well done.
Thank you.
Just a couple more questions. I was just going to ask you if you could go back in time to the little girl or young woman writing that diary at sort of age 13 and give her one piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah, so I actually have done this. It was something that someone suggested, that you write a letter to your however old self. So mine was to my 13-year-old self. And it's really, really quite tough. But it's so effective. I personally found it incredibly effective. And I basically just said, you know what? Like, there's this thing called diet culture that's going to try and sort of get you and like put a sort of fuzz over you. But you know what? You are unique. You are absolutely you, and you are whole, and it's okay. There's going to be some tough times, and you're not going to look the same as everybody else, but that's okay. You don't have to. And being you and being unique is absolutely fine and is more than fine. It's more than enough. And you be you and don't apologize for being you. And it's really empowering because it's so strange, because you're obviously writing this to your younger self, but it's therapeutically sort of you telling yourself in the now. And it was really nice because I've never really heard that from myself before. And it's like, if you're going to tell that to your younger self, why aren't you believing that now? And why aren't you telling that to yourself now? So it was great. It was really good. Yeah, to do that.
Sound like a really good exercise for anyone to do. Yeah, definitely. We were talking as well just before we started recording about the fact that restrictions are being lifted, or have been quite a lot lifted already in the UK after the coronavirus, and that can actually throw up its own difficulties, having to go back out into the world when we've all been able to kind of hide away a bit. Is there anything you've learned from that experience that you think might be helpful to share in terms of how you've dealt with those kind of new stresses?
Yeah, so obviously, lockdown number one actually made me realise that I have BDD and other issues, and I do have a lot of anxiety around health and the virus, but also around my body. And it's extremely difficult sort of thinking about going out and being seen again because of how my body looks now. But yeah, ultimately, I just didn't want to be seen. I didn't feel valuable enough to go out and spend time with friends and family. So it was incredibly isolating. But what I did was I created a roadmap of thoughts when they sort of brought out the COVID roadmap of, by this date, we're hoping to be at this stage of the roadmap. And I thought, you know what, I'll do a roadmap of thoughts. And it was actually something that I saw on social media that was really inspirational. So I thought that will really help me. And there's so many things that are out of our control, like, the way other people behave, the way other people think, my body changing. There's so many things that I just can't control. But there are so many things that I can focus on and that I can not control, but I can actually have a positive impact on. So one of the things that I wrote down was this feeling of, I want to see people, but I don't want to be seen. but the way I sort of dealt with that was using my sort of grounding techniques and the coping mechanisms that I've developed and sort of all the positive affirmations, but also knowing that my friends are my friends because of me as a person rather than what I look like. And another one was about clothes. So none of my clothes were fitting. And instead of, letting my BDD win and skyrocket and be like, right, okay, you need to do this, that and the other, to fit into them. Instead of giving into that, I actually honored my body now and had a bit of sort of body acceptance and self-worth and decided that actually I'm going to use this as a good sort of way of, actually buying clothes that I like, that I've never been able to do before, and enjoying shopping that I've never been able to do before. So I decided to use some of my savings from hiding away and isolating myself and not going out and enjoying life to, enjoy life in colour, which is a life with less BDD. It's a great big screw you to my BDD, because it's like, I'm not giving you the power to live my life anymore. I'm going to use this experience to my benefit and actually buy something that I really like the look of and that feels really good on my body right now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that you mention social media there actually as well, because for many people, as I think you mentioned earlier, there's so much this sort of diet culture and pressure to look a certain way. A lot of it comes from social media, doesn't it? But it sounds as if it can actually also be something that helps you with your recovery as well. Have you found that? And if so, is that by following certain accounts that you've had that support? Or
yeah, social media is one of those things where it's very much a double-edged sword. So for me, it's been a vehicle for both maintaining and triggering my BDD, but it's also helping with my recovery and sort of with my well-being in general, because social media is not reality. It's sort of the highlights of people's lives and personas that are intentionally jazzed up, and they're meant to be the best, most perfect, most positive, most amazing looking experiences and things. But actually most of it is set up and it's edited and it's filtered, and it makes you feel inadequate, and it makes you feel invaluable and worthless. And that's only if you let it to a certain extent. But I mean, we're exposed to so much of that. This is the ideal way to be. This is the ideal way to live. This is the ideal way to look. And what I did was I got stuck in this really, really bad place, at rock bottom. And it's a rabbit hole that you just go down and you find yourself you can't get out of it. And that looking at things like that is going to make you unhappy and harm your self-worth, but you can't help it. And it takes a lot to sort of realize that it's really, really damaging for your mental health and physical health if it really gets you in that way. So what I did was, and it's incredibly difficult to do, but once you start doing it, it's so empowering that I started to unfollow the things that made me feel like that. And there is another side to social media where people are calling this out and being real on there and showing real people, real lives, unfiltered, daily life and real bodies, and not this wannabe sort of life, but people enjoying their experiences and being inspired and lifted by one another. It's immersing myself in that body acceptance and that body diversity sort of realm, and seeing people that, oh, actually, I look like that, and that's normal, and it should always have been normal, and we are meant to look different. It's just we've been told, and we've grown up in a world where we're not meant to look different, and we're teased for it and we're bullied for it. But I think it can be really, really damaging, but also really, really good if you use it in the way that is good for you.
Exactly. You've actually already given us loads of sort of hints and tips and by describing the things that you've come up with for yourself as well, the tools that you're using. But is there any advice that you think you haven't covered, or even just any words of support or comfort that you would give to someone who's really struggling with their BDD?
Yeah, I think advice is really difficult to give, I think, because everybody's BDD is different and everybody's experience is very different. And it can be really, really hard to think of that life out there with less BDD. So rather than give advice, I just want to give reassurance that however it looks to you and however it means to you, whatever it means to you, there is this life out there for each one of us. And we do deserve to be here and to live that life that we want and we deserve. And I just, again, because it's something that I just have lived with my whole life, in terms of we're not defined by our appearances alone. You know, our friends and family and loved ones are there for us and love us for who we are and not what we look like. You know, our appearances and what we look like do not determine our value and self-worth. And I just think it's really important to reiterate that, because it's something that is so all-consuming, and we are so much more than that, for sure.
That's very true, and a perfect note to end on. So thank you so much for coming on and telling your story, and for bringing so much that's sort of your personal experiences and things you've learned for yourself. It's just been really interesting and inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again to Flora for taking the time to tell us about her experiences and share her toolkit for beating BDD. To hear more episodes, just search for Beating BDD on major podcast apps and Spotify. You can also leave us feedback by following the BDD Foundation on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube and Facebook. I'll be back with another interview soon. In the meantime, remember that this podcast isn't therapy, so please do seek help from a trained professional. Thanks for listening.